Oh, what do the Green Bay Packers need to do for the draft? I don't know. Maybe get this frickin' frackin' trade done first. Grassy Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to another episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Is it just five? Grassy, and today, that's right, I don't care. Trade be damned. We're talking about draft content, baby, because it is April, and that means it is one of the best times of the year. The NFL draft is a matter of weeks away, and it's time to kick things off. And we're going to start today talking about the top 5 needs that the Green Bay Packers currently have. I'm going to rank them from 5 to 1. I'm going to also do some honorable mentions. But basically, this is just to get an idea and start talking about what the Packers may be targeting for this year's draft. Now, not to toot my own horn, but every now and then, Tom Grassi gets something right. And last year, I was able to predict 5 players that the Green Bay Packers wound up drafting, so who knows? I probably will not have that amount of success again. Starting off with our honorable mentions. This one should be apparent. Quarterback. Now, this is not a slight at Jordan Love whatsoever. It's just we need a backup QB. Aaron Rodgers obviously is going to be moved to the New York Jets any day now, or at least that's what we've been saying for the past month and a half. And someone needs to back up Jordan Love. Now, there is talks potentially about bringing in a veteran QB, which the Packers could do. However, I also wouldn't be surprised if the Packers just draft one in the later rounds, probably around rounds 5 through 7, just because Jordan Love, he is not a rookie, and while he is a very young QB, I mean, the guy has been in the league since 2020. So I'm tending to lean a little bit more towards them drafting a late round QB, someone who could learn behind Jordan Love, not really pose any threat whatsoever. And eventually I think they'll just wind up keeping 2 QBs on the roster. But for right now, I do think they'll target one in the draft. And the other honorable mention is defensive tackle. I almost put this at number 5. However, I am going to choose to believe in Devonte Wyatt because maybe the Green Bay Packers will decide to actually play him this year because they need a guy next to Kenny Clark. They have needed someone on that defensive line forever. And when they drafted Devonte Wyatt in the first round, I said, hey, finally, here we go. However, he didn't see a lot of snaps. He played pretty darn well when he did get opportunities, and I imagine they're kind of taking the Rashawn Gary approach, in which they're just slowly easing him in. You'll remember they drafted Rashawn Gary when they had the Smith bros, Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith, still on the roster. So I imagine that the Packers could target a defensive tackle in the draft, but for right now, it's not one of the top 5 needs, in my opinion. So what are the top 5 needs? Let's get started with number 5, and that's going to be the good old offensive line. Now, the Green Bay Packers offensive line, it's not in a terrible spot. However, there are some pieces that are questionable, and we're trying to figure out, is Josh Myers the guy at center? David Bakhtiari is getting a little bit older, though he played phenomenally last year, and hopefully his injuries are behind him. That is what Goody and LaFleur have indicated. However, he has a massive contract. He is getting a little bit older, so the wheels need to start turning about potentially bringing in some more depth pieces to learn behind these guys that we have. So I think offensive line is almost always going to be a need for the Packers because the Packers do love to draft offensive lineman depth, and they've done it the past couple of drafts. I wouldn't be surprised if they take one within the first 3 rounds again, just because you can never have too many offensive linemen. And so because of that, I'm going to list it at number 5 because it helps when you protect your young quarterback. Number 4, you got wide receiver. Now, this was like the number 1 need last year, but we've gotten a little bit better there. Now, I will say the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room is the cheapest in the NFL. I think we come in at around $5.5 million, which is number 32 in the league. And that's just because we have a very young roster at wide receiver. Allen Lazard went to the Jets, lost MVS and Devontae Adams last season. And so now what we're left with is guys that we drafted who could be really, really good, have high ceilings, but we do need some more depth there. You have Christian Watson, who is going to arguably be the wide receiver one. You got Romeo Doubs, and of course you have Samori Toure, who was a late round flyer, but there's a lot of promise in him, and I hope that he gets more opportunities. Now, there are talks about bringing in a veteran wide receiver, which makes a lot of sense. It's just the market is desolate right now. I don't see the Packers making a trade for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins because it just doesn't make sense. As I have said many, many times, I don't think the Packers' ambitions are going to be playoffs this year. Of course, they would like to make the playoffs, but it's more of just evaluating the talent they have, especially if Jordan Love is going to be their franchise QB. So I think getting a wide receiver early would be great. If they wound up getting a first-round pick from the Jets, which it doesn't look likely that they're going to, I could say maybe they would go for a wide receiver in the first round, but you're most likely going to see one drafted on day 2 of the draft. And I think while it wouldn't be bad to bring in a very cheap veteran minimum guy off of free agency, I think it's also good just to draft young talent as well, because the Packers, they got themselves into this situation where all of a sudden they had no wide receivers and they had to take a bunch of them. So don't be surprised if you see a wide receiver taken off the board relatively early in this year's draft. Number 3, you got edge rusher. Yep, this is where we're starting to get into, oh yeah, they need one of those. Preston Smith has been great. Love Preston Smith, but again, he's a guy who is getting a bit older. Rashawn Gary is an absolute stud. However, we have to see how he is when he comes back from his injury. I imagine he's not going to be starting the season. So right off the bat, we are going to need somebody just to fill in for Rashawn Gary. We do have Kingsley Enagbare, who absolutely loved coming out of the draft, and I think that he could get more opportunities, especially with Gary's absence in the beginning. But I would not be surprised if the Packers actually swing big in the first round, and their first overall selection is an edge rusher. You have a bunch of insane athletes at edge this year in the draft, and if the Packers really want to solidify that pass rush, which really was lacking after Rashawn Gary got injured, this is the way to do it. You can never have too many edge rushers. It's a premium position in the NFL, and considering this draft is loaded with them, I would absolutely be shocked if the Packers did not leave day 1 or 2 with a premium edge rusher. Number 2, and this was a complete toss-up, you got tight end. Oh, I was this close from putting them number 1, but tight end has to be there because, boy, oh boy, do we need one. Right now, we got Josiah DeGuara, the former 3rd-round pick, as our main tight end. We did re-sign Tyler Davis, but boy, oh boy, it's looking bleak. Robert Tonyan going to the Chicago Bears. Mercedes Lewis, who knows what's happening with him, and this just leads to a big gaping problem because Jordan Love, a young QB, would be perfect to have a tight end target that he could dump the ball off to, and I would not be surprised if Josiah DeGuara all of a sudden starts getting a lot more opportunities in the passing game, because every time Jordan Love has stepped in there, you've seen him target Josiah DeGuara a lot. So don't be surprised if he winds up having a little bit of a breakout season or is just utilized a lot more in the passing game and not just as a blocker. Now, besides all that though, this is another draft that is chock full of amazing tight ends, and it's deep too. They can of course draft early, but I don't think they'll draft a tight end in the first round like a Dalton Kincaid. I just don't think they'll do that. But day 2, there has to be a tight end pick because this can't be a position that we're ignoring any longer because we just haven't had a weapon at tight end for quite some time. Honestly, you could argue since Jermichael Finley. You had Jared Cook in there, who definitely had his moments when, of course, the Cowboys game, which he's remembered for. But at the end of the day, Robert Tonyan had that one really, really good season. But other than that, we've kind of just ignored that position. Mercedes Lewis has primarily been a blocker. He might have an important catch or 2 per game, and that was it. So this is the year to go out and get a tight end. It's going to help Jordan Love's development. And even if Josiah DeGuara is going to get the lion's share of targets, it does not hurt to have an athlete back there that can get open, especially when wide receiver is a top 5 need as well. So tight end would basically check 2 boxes and would definitely help the team's offense and the development of Jordan Love. And finally, number 1, it's safety, because right now the Green Bay Packers, if I'm not mistaken, have 7 safeties on the roster. They just resigned Levitt today, and right now, here is our safety room. We have Darnell Savage, Rudy Ford, Tariq Carpenter, Tavarius Moore, who we just got from the 49ers, Enos Gaines, Vernon Scott, and that's about it. So with a lot of those guys, they might not even be playing safety. They might just be there for special teams, looking at you, Levitt. So Right off the bat, the Packers have a huge problem. Adrian Amos did not have a great season with the Packers last year. It doesn't look like they are going to re-sign Adrian Amos, and so there is a glaring need at safety. Brian Gutekunst in February talked about potentially moving Rasul Douglas to safety. However, Matt LaFleur came out and said, yeah, that could happen, but he's not going to start there. We're going to move him into the slot. You have Keyshawn Nixon, who's probably going to play nickel at corner, and so right now, I don't know what the hell we do at safety. Safety has to be addressed in the draft this year. I know they traded up for Darnell Savage, who's been a little bit disappointing, but they did pick up his fifth-year option, so obviously he is playing. But the Packers really need to take a good hard look at their secondary. Corner, I think we're pretty solid right now, but safety needs to get a much needed improvement just because the guys that are there are either late round picks, are going to be special teamers, and even with Darnell Savage, there are question marks. So don't be surprised if their first pick is a safety. I'm not really sold that's what they're going to do, but this is another target, day one, day two, that I don't see the Packers leaving without a safety, because right now, in my opinion, it is the Packers' biggest need. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. What would you say the top 5 needs for the draft are for the Green Bay Packers? Let me know. Before we get out of here, I want to do a big shout and thank you to some brand new patrons and YouTube members. First, on the Patreon side of things, we have Jonathan Haley, we have Kimberly Lassiter, and Ed L. A big shout and thank you to you. And over on the YouTube side of things, joining the Grossi Posse Plus, we have Jeremy Joyle, we have Elijah Guerrero, we have Dr. Schwartz, PhD, we have Guillermo Contreras, we have Jaws of Life, and Nick Kovac. A big shout out and thank you to you all. You can always send me at TomGrossiComedy.com or TomGrossiComedy, all social media, see down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.